This is Emergency FD Storyline.
I've learned a lot, as a leader. I have to be willing to open up and share my story. We've talked about it. I was at 750 Adams. I was at the dollar store fire. I've been on the other some other scenes. To be able to share those stories with other people and let them understand that I've been there when things went really, really bad, and I hope and pray that nobody ever has to go through those feelings. That's in my mind every day, because now that when you're the director of the department, ultimately all that is my responsibility. So that weighs on me a lot.
Being a first, one who breaks new ground in leadership. That's our storyline.
I think my experience in the field, some of the really bad situations I was a part of earlier in my career, drives me to make sure that it doesn't happen again.
The views expressed on this program are from the guest and host and do not necessarily represent the views of any government agency, private company, or public service. Emergency FD Storyline's focus is to tell the stories of those in the fire service and to highlight what matters to our first responders. I'm Tom Mann, your host. My guest today, once again, is Director of the Fire Services for the City of Memphis, Gina Sweat. This is part 2 of my interview. If you missed part 1 of the Emergency FD Storyline's interview with Memphis Fire Director Gina Sweat, look for Storyline Podcast 20-03 on our website at EmergencyFD.com. Look for the Storyline Podcast tab at the top of the page or in the menu on your mobile app. That's EmergencyFD.com. There are other ways to listen to the Emergency FD Storyline podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Deezer, Podchaser, Podcast Addict, Buzzsprout, and more. And just recently, we've been added to iHeartRadio. So pass the word and listen. Now to Emergency FD Storyline. Before we get into part 2 of our 2-part interview with Director Sweat, I want to repeat a portion of our interview on our last podcast as Director Gina Sweat talks about leadership and her years of experience rising through the ranks on the job in the Memphis Fire Department. Starting from the ground up and having to work really hard to get where you are, you've been where they are. How has that really helped you in your role now as you look back?
I think it helped me tremendously coming up through the ranks and hitting those different levels. Like I said, we have a lot of young people that maybe never worked with me on a fire scene or anything, so they're going by what they've heard, whether good or bad. But I have been there and done that. I've been in some really tough situations and had to make some really tough decisions, and because of that, I think that probably helped me more than it hurt me. I remember a lot of the bad stuff. Some of that stuff stays with you forever, but it also has caused me to be more driven to try to make sure that things like that don't happen again, that they have. It's my responsibility now to make sure they're well equipped.
I know you're very concerned about cancer, PTSD, which we'll get into. Those are passions for you as well. You've experienced some of these things, and then you know people that have been deeply involved and have dealt with cancer, that have had to deal with these tragic situations on the job.
When I first came on, we went to the full bunker gear. They were just coming out of the hip boots, and we all had an air pack that we shared. We had to wash it every day. So cancer is real. We've lost firefighters, whether it was occupational or not. One of the firefighters was on my company, Brian Green. His was likely not job-related, but he died of stomach cancer. If that's something we can avoid, it's one thing, if you get caught up in a bad situation at a fire and everything has been done properly, and bad things do happen sometimes. But some of these exposures we can avoid, or we can at least reduce their exposure to the carcinogens. And that's why we're working on the care and maintenance program and washing turnouts and providing hoods, and we fix the exhaust systems. We're moving ice machines off of apparatus floors where they were literally having exhaust fumes in their ice that they were putting in their glasses, and just a lot of things that we're doing differently to help the firefighters help themselves. I hope that they're paying attention and doing the proper decon on the scenes and stuff, all of the stuff we're putting out, because we're doing it for them. We're doing it so that they don't get exposed. Please don't take it home to your family. And they take it home and they're exposing their young kid to stuff like that. So I think what we're doing is saving lives. We may never know the direct impact of it, but I know that we're headed in the right direction, just giving them the tools and stuff to do that kind of decon that they need to do and to reduce their exposures. We're looking at mental wellness, which is hugely complicated for the alpha-type personalities that get involved in the fire and police service. I have a lot of conversations with my counterpart in police. You got all these very strong-willed personalities that are very dominant and very,
You can't tell me what to do, and I'm going to do it, and I'm going to take charge.
We feel like we're, in just like
Superman,
Superwoman, Wonder Woman, all of these things, and we're really not.
Yeah.
All of us have a breaking point. Over my career, I've had to go, talk to some people a few times about some of the incidents I was involved in because I didn't know if I wanted to come back to work or not. There was a time when especially being a woman, I really was never really comfortable talking about the fire station because I was already worried that they saw me as weaker. Yeah. And wow, if I was emotional about something, earlier in my career, I really wasn't comfortable being able to talk about things at the fire station, except for some really close friends. After you get to be closer with people, then it becomes a little easier to talk about. We're doing some things. We got a therapy dog program we just started. We're doing the critical incident debriefing program. We're trying to boost that, make it a little better. We're looking at ways to try to help the firefighters if they want to help themselves. You can send a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And I can sit you in a room with a counselor, but if you don't really want to, get better, then it makes it a little harder. I think there's more resources available now than there ever has been if they really want to take advantage of it.
You're listening to EmergencyFD Storyline. To find out more about Director Gina Sweat, check out a video on our website called Being a First. That's Being a First. You'll find it on EmergencyFD.com under the Video Library tab. You can also find it under the menu icon on your mobile app. That's www.emergencyfd.com. Look for the title, Being a First. One thing I appreciate about Director Sweat is her willingness to share her experiences and talk about her own personal challenges and struggle while on the job. We now continue with part 2 of my interview with Memphis Fire Director Gina Sweat.
We've talked a little bit about being the director of the City of Memphis Fire Services, and then you were mentioning just a moment ago, and something I want to get a little bit personal about, and that is you were talking about mental health and dealing especially with post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's really what we're getting into when we talk with first responders. It's this culture, it's the job, it affects people. Somebody told me just yesterday that you cannot work this job and not be affected in some way by what you've seen, what you've heard, what you've smelled. You can go through all of the senses. And I want to talk a little bit about you because you understand that going through the ranks. And now here you are as the director. And to be honest with you, I sit across from the table, and I'm very proud to have seen someone that has risen through the ranks, but also watch you grow and really go through some difficult times. Tell me about that. What were the first things, I guess, that hit you, and then what you were having to deal with?
So probably the first incident was at the Ponderosa paper warehouse down off of Thomas, about a month, 6 weeks, a month before 750 Adams. One of my best friends on the job then, his name is Ivy Malone, and we had some bales. They make these big, they recycle paper, and they have these big bales of paper with baling wire. They had a fire in there, and the sprinkler was going off. This paper bales are stacked up 20, 25, 30 feet high, and I had been in there with my lieutenant and was getting ready to leave, and Ivy was actually replacing me on the hose. He was following the hose line in. I was going to change out my bottle, and before I got out the door, he had gotten in, and the bales had fallen on him and trapped him. He was basically face down in between the bales of paper. And, that was 26 years ago. And I can tell you, it took us 46 minutes to dig him out. We were basically digging him out by hand. And he almost lost his leg. He could have drowned because he actually landed face down, and the water was gathering around him. But he almost lost his leg. When he went into surgery, he didn't know if he was going to wake up with a leg or without one.
It just missed you, essentially.
Yeah, I was coming out and he was going in. And I remember we had a conversation. And I've always kind of had a weird instinct. And I remember saying to him, hey, something sounded weird in there. Be careful, watch out where you're going. And he made some comment. We kind of bantered back and forth, really, truly like brother and sister. And so that, that was the first really incident that I remember. Because when you're a rookie, you're still kind of green, and it's exciting and it's fun, and you really don't think about getting hurt. You're a kid. You don't, nothing can, you just don't think about getting hurt till you actually see someone you really care about get hurt. So that happened, and then probably, like I said, about 4 to 6 weeks after that is when 750 Adams, that fire happened, and where we lost 2 firefighters that night. There was, a lieutenant that was probably considered, one of the best at his job, and,
Great guy.
Everybody, he was always so nice to me, and still when I was still young, a lot of people were still trying to fill me out, and some of the older guys didn't even really want to talk to me if they saw me, so I just remember Lieutenant Mathis being such a personable guy, such a great guy, and like you said, seeing what happened at 750 Adams.
He was gone, but I remember you almost pushed people out of the way and you started doing CPR. And I remember that on him as he was going to ambulance. And I for some reason, that struck me because I saw this person come up and just move right in there, and that was you. And I remember that.
That was really tough. And I almost quit. Those two things happened within a month of each other. My mom was not happy. Yeah. She was worried to death about me. What you don't know, all that stuff I struggled through, and I don't think we've talked about this, but we had another fire at 750 Adams several months later. And I had somehow got separated. And actually, I was in the stairwell by myself. And we actually had it was not near like the other fire we had. It was just a room and contents fire. But I actually stood in the stairwell and had a conversation with myself about whether I was going to go down the hallway and catch up with the team or whether I was not going to go down the hallway. And I remember it was probably like, just seconds. It seemed like forever I was standing there. And I remember just taking a deep breath and saying, if I don't go, I've got to quit. So I made that decision to follow the hose line down the hallway and caught up with my team, and I'm still here today. So that was the moment where I decided I was going to stay and be a firefighter, and this was what I was going to do.
For any of us that were there at that time, that was a time period afterward where someone was telling me there was like a fear in the department, and people were not the aggression that everybody had going in and really offensive firefighting, that sometimes it was very hard to do that job after losing both of those individuals.
So we had lost 2 firefighters at
Pilgrim's Hope. So it's been 4
right
within
as
almost a
that
year
happened,
and a half.
right as I was getting ready to get out of fire school, I believe. Pilgrim's Hope. I was not at that fire, but people in my class were, and then followed not too long after that with 750 Adams. So those make things really real for you. Like I said, I don't want anybody to have to go through what I went through, what we went through as a department. But sometimes people don't until you have been there and seen it, you seem to lose kind of track of how serious and how dangerous this really is.
I don't know about you, but I know you have the images. They never leave your mind, do they?
No, I remember that. I remember the aftermath, the investigation that ensued, and it was a lot.
I've often thought about that, and this is one of the things with that time. That was, I think, a marker for the whole department that produced a lot of changes, and they couldn't. And what's interesting is they've continued to evolve. I know being there and seeing that it did produce many changes, and people were blamed every time that happens. People blame people. I know you were even the brunt of that. Everybody else was the brunt of that. Of course, I had been part of that investigation and knew everything going on. So you have not only the trauma of what took place, but then you have I guess, the emotional baggage that you wind up carrying from everything that happens. And it's because everybody's grieving and they're hurting, and that's across the board.
And there was blaming and all that goes on. And, you realize that as you kind of move up, because I guess one of the next, it was not really it wasn't on the fire scene, but David O'Connor was my driver. He was one of my drivers in my battalion, and we were actually at Sears Crosstown before it became the cool new place that it is now. We used to go out there and do battalion training all the time. We were actually out there training when they left and got that call, and I remember hearing his lieutenant on the radio, and I knew him very well, and he was pretty calm, cool, but I could tell by his voice something was wrong. So I actually ended up calling him, and he said, where they were, you need to get over here right now. So I remember hauling butt over to where they were on the scene, and they were still working on David at the time we got there. And, it's interesting how your perspective changed at that point. I'm the battalion chief. He's one of my guys, and we were like all hands on deck. And then we were focused on trying to get his wife to the hospital.
It changes everything, doesn't it?
It changes everything, so probably 750. I was more probably concerned to myself then.
Mm-hmm.
But, as your responsibilities increase and you have more people that you're responsible for, I remember when I was trying to take care of all the guys that worked with David and trying to get his family there and everything. So, that's a different kind of stressor. You just wonder, but that was really something we couldn't control. That was that was a medical issue. So, then it's taking care of the firefighters and the personnel that he worked with after that, and making sure that his family's taken care of and everything's done appropriately in the way it should be. So, there's a lot of growth between 750 Adams and there for me personally and professionally. And probably the next really traumatic thing after that was the dollar store fire in Fraser. And I was come in on the second alarm on that one and ended up being on the back side of the dollar store when they pulled one of the firefighters out, and when they pulled Private Zachary out. And then we were still trying to get to Lieutenant Kirk. And I actually went to fire school with Trent.
Yeah.
So when he
was the peer.
He wasn't even on our shift.
Wow.
So somebody came and told me who it was, and everything that us trying to get to him and get him out, and having to make the decision to pull people out the back before we were able to find him and get him out. That was, it was pretty tough. And what I know is we were fortunate we didn't lose several more firefighters that night. There was a lot of things that went on. And it was a pretty close call. We could have lost more. So I'm thankful that we didn't. That was another one of those fires that will be ingrained in my memory forever.
So when we talk, we say that word post-traumatic stress disorder, and really they're not words, and it's not just I have a feeling. It affects your thinking for your life. And sometimes you can close your eyes, you can wake up, and I know you're just that description of being at 750 Adams for the second time, and you're making a decision to go down the hallway. Well, let me just ask you, do you get those? I mean, you get those dreams, you get those things that come back every once in a while. You've lived some of that.
I have. And, I went and talked to somebody.
Finally, after you.
Yeah. A couple, after each of after 750 Adams and the dollar store, there was, I went to talk to a professional. Interestingly enough, I was ashamed to tell anybody at the station back after 750 Adams that I was talking to anybody. So I don't think anybody at the station even knew, because I was embarrassed and I didn't want them to think I was weak. I hope that we have grown as a profession. I hope this department has grown, and that people know that it's okay to not be okay, And it is okay to not be okay with the things you see and the things that, you experience. And post-traumatic stress, before it becomes a disorder, there are things you can do. There's resilience programs. We have peer counselors. There's professionals. There's lots of tools that we have in our toolbox to keep it from getting to the disorder part. All of us that do this profession have experienced post-traumatic stress. You can't do this job without having that experience. But my call for professionals in our field is there's an intervention point before it becomes a disorder. Do those things that help you reduce stress, those things that you enjoy. Don't take it home to your family. But I think you do have to involve your family. So they're probably some of the first ones that start seeing some of these key indicators that things aren't right and you're not okay with this. So I think there's a lot of work left to do in our profession. I'm glad that we're having the conversation out loud now, because 25 years ago we really didn't talk about it well, and it wasn't safe to talk about it. So I'm encouraged at least that you and I are having this conversation now, and that somebody listening is going like, oh, wait, it's okay to not be okay, and I can go talk to somebody and get some help before it gets out of hand and keeps you from being able to do the job that you love. And some people, they don't seek that intervention before it comes too late. And I hate to, and that's really sad, because I think most people get in this profession because they want to help people and they want to make a difference. And then because they fail to help themselves, they fail to see them as, the person that needs help, and they don't get that help for themselves. It keeps them from doing a job that they love. So I hope that's what people get out of this.
That's good. Well, thank you. Gina Sweat, City of Memphis, Director of the Fire Services. And thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Part 2 of my interview with Memphis Fire Director Gina Sweat. And that's our storyline. To find out more about Director Gina Sweat, I want to encourage you again to check out a video on our website called Being a First. You will find it on EmergencyFD.com under the Video Library tab. If you're on a mobile phone or a tablet, you can find it under the menu icon on our mobile app. That's www.emergencyfd.com. Look for the title, Being a First. While we have some time, I want to give you a preview of some upcoming interviews coming to EmergencyFD Storyline. One key individual who allowed me to enter the world of firefighting in Memphis was former Memphis Fire Director Charles E. Smith. Many of us know him as Charlie. Under Director Smith's leadership in Memphis, Tennessee during the 1990s, there were many major changes made to the fire service that last to this day. I can honestly tell you I've been waiting to do this interview for 2 decades. Just like Director Gina Sweat in this podcast, former Memphis Fire Director Charles Smith shares his memories of a particular incident, 750 Adams, also known as Regis Towers. And here's a sample of that upcoming interview.
Regis was probably one or two incidents that I recall that shocked me when I got on the scene. You're kind of developing this mental framework of what you expect to see. I didn't expect to see what I saw at Regis High Rise, people hanging out of windows, people being rescued and so forth. And
it was a serious incident. It was a major thing.
So once I took command, some point during that process, the Chief of Emergency Medical Services whispered to me, we've lost 2 firefighters. Major shock, obviously, in the middle of an incident. But I kept commanding because I knew you can't lose it. This is not the time. You got to keep marching ahead. You got to keep getting these orders to, one, contain that fire, rescue all these people. I don't recall how long I'd been on the scene, but evidently whatever happened early. 7A, which was the officer, saying something, but it was all kind of garbled. So once I got on the scene and talking to the battalion chief, my first question was, are you in communications with 7s? Because that's the first engine up on the scene. He told me it was. Well, he couldn't have been. I mean, in retrospect, in the investigation, that was impossible. All the things that were hitting me, I had to kind of break it out like a ICS system. I had a job to do, and I didn't want anyone interfering with that.
I remember as time went on, I guess you go through those stages, their guy's going to be angry. There's somebody to blame. Part of that's part of the grieving process.
Yes,
Because you
yes.
got these tough guys.
Clearly.
Yeah, and they were very close. And sometimes they blame each other. They blame a chief. They blame that firefighter or that one.
Right.
Which, when you get down to the end of it, neither one of they had, there was no one person. There were mistakes. And I think about that incident.
Well, that's
you go through, and there were so many little things.
If you think about it, one of the reasons we did that report is to address those issues.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot of mistrust. There was a lot of blame.
Let's tell about that, because you did a full.
I did a full investigation.
Yeah.
We laid it out. We interviewed every person on the scene and developed a response, a report. There's two reasons for that. One most important reason, I wanted everyone to know the truth. No more of this hiding stuff. If we're going to make changes in the fire department, we're going to make changes open. Transparency is the big word today. We were going to be transparent. When that report was released, no one challenged the report. No one. We gave a press conference, if you recall, and went over the entire incident report. And after the press conference, the media was quiet. They didn't ask anything. So finally we closed and asked a couple of reporters after the meeting, why didn't you say anything? They said, y'all answered every question we had. So I thought that was a major compliment, that we did the right thing.
Former Director Charles E. Smith. His interview coming up on a future EmergencyFD Storyline podcast. Memories of certain incidents never leave you, and I share some memories with many. One of those individuals is Fire Inspector Todd Conklin. Todd Conklin, next on EmergencyFD Storyline.
This call comes in for motor vehicle fire on the interstate. But soon did we find out this was not your ordinary car fire. And so at first, nobody thought nothing about it.
This was fully involved.
5
minutes?
I would guess it was probably 3 to 5 minutes this car burned. 20 feet in the air. We got the car out, and they said fire knocked down and everything, and the smoke started slowly but surely clearing. I don't remember if it was a trucker or if it was a cop or what it was. Somebody hollered, hey, there's somebody in that car. And then all of a sudden you see the smoke, and then you see a silhouette, and you're like, no way. And then he moved,
And he moved.
and everybody was like, that's not possible. This isn't real. And, every one of us was shell-shocked, obviously. I don't know if you remember this. As we went to get him out of the car, people that had been stopped on the interstate, police, may have been news media, I don't know who all was there. Well, as we go to pull him out, I remember looking over and all of them turning white and a bunch of them running, just scattering because of what they were seeing. Literally looked like they'd seen a ghost.
I remember I walked up to you with a camera, and you had these eyes. You were in shock is a word. I knew you were new on.
Yeah.
And then I remember your comment, they don't teach you this in fire school. How's that affected you? And then as you went through the job through the years?
I'll never forget that morning because I was a rookie and they took our turnouts and
I remember that. Had to decon everything.
Had to decon everything, ran us through showers, and we're in Tyvek suits because we didn't have any extra clothes because we weren't prepared for anything. I remember going home because that smell, like you said, was still in my head, and I couldn't get it out of my head. And as I remember washing my hair and closing my eyes, and I saw him. I mean, not that he was standing there, but I saw him.
Yeah.
And I'd open up my eyes and like, all right, that was weird. Finished taking a shower, closed my eyes again, there he was again. So I remember, taking a shower, drying off, getting dressed, called a buddy of mine, wasn't on the fire department, just a friend I've had forever, still friends to this day. I said, hey, man, what are you doing? And he said, no, nothing, doing some stuff around the house. I said, cool, I'm coming over. And he's like, you all right? And I said, I will be. But I knew that I did not want to be alone.
Yeah.
At mental health, firemen, we don't necessarily trust talking to anybody that's not one of us. You don't understand what we do. You don't see what we see. When I say this, you don't get it. And every fireman I know is the same way. There's certain things that we'll tell each other. I've never told my wife. I've never told my kids. Don't ever plan on telling them. I probably at 25 years old had no concept of PTSD and what it meant or if it even...
We're young. It's okay.
Yeah.
Get over it.
You're a fireman. You'll be all right.
Yeah. I've seen that. Everybody, that's the thing.
But after time, kind of like a hard drive in a computer, you get to a point where you can't store it anymore. There's nowhere to put it.
Yeah.
You know, you can't just erase one to, all right, that one can go away now, and I'll put this one in its place. And I think that's what happens to a lot of guys, that it just gets to the point where they can't process it, deal with it, or put it away anymore. Hopefully, and I think we've made leaps and bounds, especially in Memphis, we're trying, is to help those guys process that stuff.
Todd Conklin, next on Emergency FD Storyline. If you would like to contact Emergency FD Storyline with comments or suggest a story or subject for an upcoming podcast, email us at storyline@emergencyfd.com. That's storyline@emergencyfd.com. I'm Tom Mann, and I want to thank you for listening. There are many stories coming on Emergency FD Storyline. Don't miss it.